And welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. I am joined today by a special guest, 24/7 Sports national college football reporter, Matt Zenitz. Many of you have probably seen that name a lot over the past couple months or so. We're very glad to have Matt on board as part of the 24/7 network as of the past few months. And Matt, I know it's been a busy, the portal's closed, but that doesn't mean anything in terms of guys still moving around, trying to find their landing spots. And you and Chris Hummer on our national team have done a phenomenal job with that. I guess just what have the past couple months been like? It seems like every year the portal in this kind of cycle of the year just gets crazier and crazier.
I think my wife would agree with that. the last couple months have been just hectic, busy, a lot of time spent on the phone, but it's really been the last 6 months as a whole, really starting in November. That's always the busiest time of the year for me, starting with the coaching cycle, which obviously every year gets started in November, the early to middle part of November. And from there, transitioned into not only dealing with coaching transactional stuff, but the winter portal cycle. You have the coaching cycle itself, which now at this point extends into the latter part of March. And then you enter April, where you're not only keeping up with spring football and trying to have a good feel for what's going on around the country, but then obviously you have a progression in terms of hearing different things leading up to the spring portal window opening. That officially opens the middle part of the month. And now even with that closed, you do still have some players that have decisions to make that are still free agents right now, even though fortunately we're at a point where the portal is starting to dry up, which I am happy about. My wife is happy about. My family is happy about, and finally get into a period where get to scale back at least to a certain degree. Knock on wood.
What is the I was going to say, barring some sort of crazy thing that happens during this show, which is obviously not out of the question.
I say all that, and Peyton Thorne finds a magical way to enter the portal coming out of this.
Exactly.
Doing this with you all because I jinxed it and said that. So that's why I had to throw in the knock on wood.
As a kind of on that note of, I think every year you see things that maybe surprise you a little bit more, at least me personally, in the portal, but you being so close to it and so close to, hearing from multiple sides of this. What are some, I guess I know you can't go into specifics, but what are some things that you've heard this portal cycle, whether it be figures thrown out from the NIL world, whether it be transfer stories? What are some things that might surprise the average college football fan in terms of how this process works?
I don't know if it's necessarily a surprise, but for me, I have a background with the NFL. I covered the NFL. I have a lot of relationships in the NFL space. And to me, this feels like NFL free agency. That's what this is essentially become to a certain degree. And obviously you have not only players that are trying to find the best fits for themselves in terms of schools, but you have the negotiation element also. And even though we don't technically classify college players as professionals as of yet, to me, that they've become professionals to a large degree, especially when you factor in everything that just talked about.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You wrote something I remember last week. And you just said it. Here's the latest on some of the top free agents out there. When you have this kind of market, that is probably the proper term. Lots of people have lots of different fixes for what's going on right now. Before we get into some of those ideas, because Hugh Freeze had an interesting comment last week about something maybe he'd like to see implemented. What are some things that you hear from a coaching standpoint from the coaches who are in the middle of this? Because obviously everyone agrees the current model of NIL is sort of unsustainable. This current sort of free-for-all in the transfer market is unsustainable. What are some ideas that you hear from folks within this industry about things that could be reasonably fixed within the next couple of years?
Yeah, so something that immediately comes to mind for me, had a conversation within the last week with a coordinator at a high-end upper tier school who was sharing some of the things that he would change if he were in position to do that. And it goes back to some of just comparisons I just made to the NFL part of it. So that was something that he referenced and also brought up just the big differences compared to NFL free agency, and some of those big differences that I think a lot of coaches around the college space, a lot of people working in the college space would probably like to see, and this individual coach referenced was, first of all, when you sign players at the NFL level, you know that you have those players locked in for X amount of years because they're signing a contract that has them locked in for that duration of time unless a team decides to move on. At the college level, you have a system in place right now where players are legitimately able to just go into the portal pretty much every cycle at this point, or threaten doing that to try to get more money out of their current situation and leverage their current situation or whatever. To go along with that, you also have, just as this coach brought up, even being at a high-end place, the lack of a salary cap compared to the NFL. So you have some schools that have significantly more money to work with compared to not only other schools, but compared to even to some other top tier schools. And it just creates a lack of a level playing field to a certain degree. So that was something he referenced, and I know he's not alone in just having some concerns about that and some of the just things that contributes to in terms of lack of level playing field. But those would be a couple of the things that immediately come to mind for me just coming out of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of comparable into what I want to talk about next. Hugh Freeze had this idea last week, and he's someone who brings up pretty consistently the problems that are going on. But kind of like you said, his idea was, hey, we've got to get these players on a contract if we truly are moving into a semi-pro, amateur sports type of situation. Because in his mind, he said, if I were to leave, someone would owe Auburn that amount of money. If any coach were to leave, that's obviously what we deal with when the coaching cycle comes around. Same sort of thing for the players was his sort of, intention with talking about that. Has that been a popular line of thinking? Do you think is maybe trying to lock players down with a little bit more stuff in writing? Because like you said, guys are on campus for a couple months in spring practice. Auburn had it with Isaiah Rakes. He was at USC for 3 months, then decides to just go to Auburn right after spring practice is over. Has that been sort of a popular line of thinking?
It seems like there are some schools that already have that kind of deal in place right now, which factored into some players that either entertain going into the portal, or in some cases or one individual school that comes to mind, some players that went into the portal that ultimately returned to that situation just because it seemed like there were some things from a contractual standpoint that made it difficult to move on. So hear about some of that already now, but that's something that's going to become even more necessary for schools moving forward, just so you're not dealing with situations where you have individual players every cycle that you're concerned about losing, and you just have that level of unknown. Coaches obviously have enough that they deal with on a daily basis. There are enough responsibilities there without having to worry that every single portal cycle you could be losing X player. It would be nice for people in that space to just know that you have individual players locked in for X amount of time.
Yeah, and if they were to break that, there would obviously be, consequences they'd have to pay, or, the school would be sort of protected in that aspect. I think that's something that people don't realize. Maybe they do realize, but something that's not talked about enough is, player retention in the portal right now. You've got guys going, you got guys coming, but, player retention is probably the biggest thing right now, because like you mentioned earlier, you're having conversations constantly with guys that are threatening to leave. Maybe if they're hearing from somewhere else. Tampering is something that is just so commonplace at this point because of the third party channels. So those post spring conversations no longer are just about.
Also, just to be clear, as long as there isn't direct communication with players, it's not even like that's illegal for schools to be doing. So I know it's frowned upon, and most casual fans probably think tampering and thinking that the school is breaking the rules, but technically there's nothing illegal about it unless a school is having direct communication with a player before that player's entered the portal. But yeah, there are a lot of conversations that take place throughout the course of the year leading up to players ultimately making decisions.
Well, in every fan's favorite team, their coach is going to say, "Of course, we don't do that. That's not what we do. That's not part of our that's not part of our morals or whatever." But everyone does it. We all know that at this point. I mean, Nick Saban was at the draft talking about how, you know, there was a player who didn't go in the portal and say, oh, he was a guy we were kind of looking at to see if he would come here. And it's like, that's just the point we're at right now. When you look specifically, you're an Alabama guy, in terms of somebody who knows the state well, having covered Alabama for a while. We'll get into that side of things, but I guess just your opinion right now of what Auburn has done in terms of its transfer haul, and kind of your impressions of that program right now with Hugh Freeze, because year 2 is sort of it's interesting because I don't think you need to see 9-10 wins. You don't need that if you're Hugh Freeze, but you do need this roster to continue to improve. Do you think that's something that they've done in the portal so far?
Looking specifically at the spring portal cycle, I guess to start off, but definitely upgraded from a defensive line standpoint. Obviously added a couple guys recently, which has helped along the defensive line, including Isaiah Rakes that you mentioned already. Adding Keandre Lambert-Smith to go along with that at the receiver position was a huge deal to have a veteran figure like that who has made the contributions that he has at the college level at a place like Penn State, where he was the leading receiver for a top 10 team in the country last year. And actually, just to piggyback off of some of the stuff that we've talked about from a financial perspective, had the opportunity for more money at another school that was trying to get him. And it was actually a decent amount of money that we would have been able to make more than what he got from Auburn. But we was impressed enough and felt good enough about the situation there at Auburn that took less money than could have made elsewhere, and now puts Auburn in a position where you have a veteran playmaker like that to go along with some young promising players like Cam Coleman and some of the other talented young guys that Auburn has at receiver. And that was a significant get, and probably one of the bigger, more noteworthy acquisitions of the spring portal cycle from an offensive standpoint, really, for anybody around the country. So they've done a good job continuing to upgrade. And like I said, from a D-line perspective, adding some of the guys that they added to go along with Keyron Crawford from an edge standpoint. He was a popular guy coming from the group of 5 level. There were some moves that they made there that put them in a position now where improving on the win total from last season is even more realistic.
Were you surprised, just from an outside sort of perspective, that they did not end up getting a quarterback or choosing to get a quarterback, or just at the end of the day coming away with a quarterback in this portal cycle?
Obviously, Peyton Thorne is not Cam Newton from his days at Auburn, but at the same time, Hugh Freeze obviously has continued to voice confidence in Peyton Thorne. It would have taken someone that he deemed to be a significant upgrade to make that worth pursuing from his perspective. And I know that they looked into guys like Cam Ward during the course of the last couple of months or whatever. So it's not like they didn't do any homework on quarterbacks that were available, but there is more optimism and confidence, I think, in Peyton Thorne internally than probably what there is among the Auburn fan base. And you have to remember also, and you know this, Nathan, Peyton Thorne isn't the only guy in that quarterback room that there's some optimism about from the Auburn perspective, and have some young pieces there that they feel good about for moving forward, and maybe even they could continue to push heading into this season, depending on how things go with Peyton, which I'm sure you've gotten on your end also.
When you sort of look around teams that have kind of, those that have maybe put all their chips into this portal cycle, who are some teams that you have felt like over the past few months? Ole Miss comes to mind, obviously. For me, I'm sure it would for most people, as teams that may surprise some people with what they come away with in terms of their production this season. Who are some teams that you've heard about over the past couple months, and you're thinking, okay, they've done a good job in the portal, that they might be able to parlay that into a successful season?
Yeah, Ole Miss is an easy one, and I would love to stay in the SEC, but I'll expand outside that for this one. So for me, I have kind of recency bias, and Miami is one that during the course of the spring has definitely upgraded their roster and put themselves even more in position to be a legitimate threat and force in the ACC. So adding Cam Ward earlier this offseason, it was obviously a big deal, but you now add, if you're Mario Cristobal, one of the top running backs in the country, and Damian Martinez, one of the top portal receivers that was available this cycle, and Sam Brown, a starting linebacker from Louisville, Jalen Alderman, an under-the-radar corner, and Deani Hill from Marshall, who had interest from several Power 4 programs, including at least one in the SEC that immediately comes to mind. So Miami is one that far and away during the course of the spring cycle did one of the best jobs around the country, just in terms of upgrading and putting themselves even more in position to win and compete this season.
Matt, we won't keep you too much longer. Kind of wanted to just do a bite-sized episode here, but we talk about all these regulations and things that need to be put in place, whether it's in regards to NIL or the transfer portal. But I think the question is the NCAA even going to be that governing body that does that here in a few years? What are some of the whispers right now, or maybe, is the train on the tracks in terms of heading away from the NCAA? What are kind of your thoughts on that? And from what you hear from people in the industry about whether that's going to be something that in a few years, we're still going to be saying, hey, the NCAA needs to fix this, or if it might be, under some sort of different umbrella in terms of how college football is governed.
It's fair to say that things are continuing to shift away from the NCAA having the power that they've had in the past. And if you talk to people around the college football world, and I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to you whatsoever, there's definitely a feel that things are going to continue to progress away from the NCAA having the power that they've had in the past. So I think I think it's fair to say that there's an expectation that there's going to continue to be more of a breakaway there, and just a progressive lessening in terms of the power of the NCAA. I don't know what the structure or system is necessarily going to look like 3 to 5 years from now. I would love to be able to give you like an in-depth rundown of just what's realistic to expect, but that is definitely something that, again, I know it's not groundbreaking. I'm sure a lot of people have the same feel and sense at this point, but that is definitely the feel for a lot of people around the college football world right now in terms of the NCAA component of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would welcome that, but at the same time, like you said, we have no idea what it would look like, and I think that's probably goes without saying that's what college football is going to be like. Period. Who knows what it's going to look like just 2 years from now? Heck, I can't even imagine 5-10 years from now. But we are, of course, trying to stay on top of it. Matt Zenitz does a better job than anybody staying on top of it. You guys can follow him at mzenitz on Twitter. Matt, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast today. We appreciate your time. We'll talk to you later.
I appreciate you having me on. And just a couple quick things from Auburn perspective. So I don't know what the big takeaways for you were coming out of spring ball, but I know for me, like, as much as I obviously focused in on the portal part of it and trying to have a good feel for what's going on around the country with that there were different things that continue to come up on my end in terms of Auburn and just them being in a position where they feel a lot better as far as the playmakers that they have at receiver, and even more so after adding a Keandre Lambert-Smith and Cam Coleman, not the only guy in terms of that freshman group. That obviously you had several highly rated guys in there that they feel like is going to contribute right away, have a trio, a running back that they feel good about. It seems like, and I'm sure you've heard the same stuff, that trio of linebackers that they have was a bright spot during the course of the spring, including the transfer that they got from Duke. I will say, while the SEC is always competitive, it does seem very much realistic for Auburn to take another step forward this year under Hugh Freeze. And obviously, regardless of how good of a coach you are, it's important to surround yourself with talent. And Auburn is in a better position from a talent standpoint right now compared to where they were last season. And I'll end by saying Jalen McLeod obviously did some good stuff for Auburn last year, but he was someone that, despite the contributions, or even with the contributions he had an injury at the end of fall camp last year that really had him in a spot where it wasn't truly healthy until the middle part of last year. And based on what they've seen from him throughout the course of the offseason, throughout the course of spring ball, it seems like they're expecting big things from Jalen McLeod heading into this season.
Yeah, and you mentioned Crawford coming over from Arkansas State. They think that could be a nice 1-2 tandem. The coaching staff, I think, was the biggest thing that we heard about throughout the spring in terms of them feeling like they had upgraded. I know it was a kind of a tumultuous month there. Changing both coordinators never feels great from a program perspective, but you talk to Peyton Thorne, you talk to everybody else within this offense. Ken Austin seems like it'll be a better marriage there with Hugh Freeze, and then DJ Durkin, I think, fits a little bit more of the bill of what Hugh Freeze wants to see in an Auburn defense. But I mean, Ron Roberts was a good coordinator last year. Like their product on the field was pretty solid, especially considering the talent they didn't have on that defense. So he's got some big shoes to fill next season. So much of it comes down to quarterback as well, because they've got all those playmakers now. And so they are expecting Peyton Thorne to.
Yeah, a lot of pressure on Peyton Thorne now. And with the weapons that he has around him, including Rivaldo Fairweather, who a matchup nightmare type guy, and obviously someone that they feel really good about just in terms of the talent that he has. That there's no excuse for not having an increase in terms of production in the passing game. But I know we're focused a lot on the portal part of it and big picture stuff with college football, but I had to throw in at least some of the stuff that was coming up on my end in terms of the Auburn part of it individually. Also, I know you mentioned the background covering Alabama, but I've covered Auburn. Also covered the SEC as a whole, and this is a program that obviously I've been familiar with for a long time. And like I said, definitely expecting continued growth heading into this season from Hugh Freeze's program. Now heading into year 2 under him.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, Matt. We appreciate it again for you hopping on today.
Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Matt.